Nelson Mandela, Mandea, was truly remarkable. He was a freedom fighter, a political prisoner, a negotiator, a healer, a peacemaker, a father, a grandfather, and a husband. He was a friend to those engaged in struggle for justice across the globe. He believed in Ubuntu, Crechinshe, Arska Ahila, Amarian Nadini. He was a friend to the people of Ireland, and many people here were his friends, particularly the heroic Dunstore strikers who took a stand when those with power, in power, did not. The injustice of apartheid was an obscenity to humanity. And interestingly, just in terms of our own experience, Vorster, the South African Prime Minister, once said famously that he would swap apartheid legislation for one clause of the infamous Special Powers Act in the North. The ANC was banned, censored, and political actions were squashed. In the 1950s and early 60s, ANC activists debated how best to challenge the state. Speaking of that period, Mandela said, "We have always believed in non-violence as a tactic. Where conditions demanded that we should use non-violence, we would do so. Where conditions demanded that we should depart from non-violence, we would do so." He came to the opinion that the ANC had no alternative but armed and violent resistance. His words, not mine. And in 1961, along with Walter Sisulu and Joe Slovo, Mandela co-founded and became chairman of the armed organisation Spirit of the Nation, known as MK. MK engaged in military actions against the South African regime through his period of imprisonment and following his release. And in jail for those decades, Mandela maintained his international perspective. In his cell, in common with all political prisoners, he was allowed, as a privilege, a calendar on which he marked significant events. And on May the 5th, 1981, a simple single line is written: "IRA martyr Bobby Sands dies." A tribute handwritten on a paper calendar on a cell wall in South Africa, which recognises the bond of those who struggle for justice. And his note on that prison wall is recognition of the courage and self-sacrifice of the 10 Republican hunger strikers of our time. Walter Sisulu later told me that all the ANC prisoners marked and commemorated each of the hunger strikers who died, including Kieran Doherty, TD. Today the world is in mourning. The people of South Africa have lost their leader, their father, and humanity has lost our greatest statesman. Mandela was a leader who, by his courage, demonstrated that it is possible to reconcile differences. By his example, he showed us that it's possible to build peace out of conflict, something we try to do in our own island, that a better and more equal future based on fairness is possible, and that unity can be forged out of division. In the hard years when the Western powers were against him, when he was vilified as a terrorist, when he was denounced as a criminal, he kept the faith. He showed perseverance and vision. And there are lessons in all of this for us, but particularly for the people of the island of Ireland of all persuasions as we continue the necessary and challenging task of building the peace. I first saw Nelson Mandela when he visited Dublin in 1990. That was the day when the Irish soccer team returned home. And when he appeared, a section of the crowd began to chant, "Ooh ah, Paul McGrath's da." So the good humour of Ireland shone through. In 1995, myself and several other Sinn Féin activists travelled to South Africa at the invite of the ANC to speak to senior figures who had been centrally involved in the process of negotiations. That was the time when I met Mandela for the first time. One of the first demonstrations I ever attended was in Dublin against apartheid and the visit of the Springboks rugby team. And I've been a long-time supporter of the anti-apartheid movement, so I was delighted to be meeting with one of my heroes. During the conflict, there was also a close working relationship between Irish Republicans and the ANC, and the late Qadir Asmal, who did tremendous work here in the leadership of the Irish anti-apartheid movement, along with his wife Louise, and who was not a supporter of the IRA. In his book, mentioned by Minister Bruton, Cotter tells how the IRA provided practical training and advice and assistance with military operations to AMK. Cotter says that the famous attack of May 31st, 1980, in the Sasol oil refinery near Joburg was carried out with the assistance of the Irish Republican Army. Walter Sisulu, Cyril Ramaphosa, Thabo Mbeki, Ronnie Casserols and many others who were in the leadership of the ANC were pleased to remember the long commitment, as was Mandela himself, of Irish Republicans to their cause. And of course, for our group, the highlight of the very intense process of meetings was with Mandela. He was self-effacing, he was modest, he was totally relaxed, he was very focused. He was also very, very tough, stubborn, determined and committed, as he needed to be, to survive apartheid, to survive over 2.5 decades in prison with hard labour. He was immovable on core principles, on core values, on core issues, but pragmatic on tactics and other matters. It's also interesting that the British government at the time laboured and lobbied hard for Mandela not to meet with me, for what that's worth. And when it was clear that the ANC were determined, and Mandela was determined that the visit would go ahead, the British government lobbied that there should be no handshake and that there should be no photograph. And he ignored them. So I, along with other Sinn Féin representatives, have been privileged and greatly honoured to have met Mandela many times after that, in South Africa, here in Ireland and in Britain. Be privileged more, honour more, a Domsa. He was hugely supportive of the Irish peace process. And on several occasions, activists from the ANC and former MK activists visited Ireland, went into prisons, talked to Republican prisoners about the peace process. He had an enormous depth of the understanding of the twists and turns of our process, and he knew that there was an onus upon governments, as well as those involved in struggle to resolve issues. He believed, as I believe, as all thinking people believe, that there is an onus to create the necessary environment for peaceful solutions. Despite his age, and even when I last met with him, despite his increased physical frailty, his mind was as sharp as a razor, conversant with world affairs, with affairs on his own continent, with, for example, the injustice of the war in Iraq or Iran or Afghanistan. He was a very, very remarkable human being. It's a Mahurim Féin by a Nelson Mandela, Dundon Cunnery as far a beyond a Rio. But it's Malek mar a Juran and Gilgasha, Malek Magila Mar. All of us remember the very special occasion of the Special Olympics here in 2003. It was such a marvellous, wonderful, accoid Galanta. And we met afterwards, and he was as taken by all of the young athletes that he had met in the course of that great event as he was about issues to do with the North and the need for governments to move on the necessary business of building peace. So he will continue to inspire. He will continue in death, as he did while alive, to encourage oppressed people everywhere. And in that way, his legacy will live on. And you see, we don't have to be a Nelson Mandela. We don't have to be a Madiba. We only have to do the small things that we can do to make things better for those who suffer from injustice, from those who are deprived, from those who don't have freedom. If we all did that in a small way, then those heroes like he would not have to do the big things that they have had to do. Walter Sisulu was a wonderful man and a lifelong conspirator, political prisoner and comrade to Nelson Mandela. And when he died, any of you have the time to go and read Mandela's farewell. And I repeat just one line of it. Go well, rest in peace, Madiba, hero among heroes. Ní bheithe a leithid an a rís, ar jes je go raibh a anam díolta.